Alright guys, plan B. Yeah, we're in trouble, but we're the Guardians of the Galaxy. Now who's with me?
I'll take you to the stars. I'll show you who we are.
Usually I'd begin my review by going over exactly what makes Marvel as a brand so special and analyze exactly why each and every one of their characters resonates with all of us on a personal level one way or another. But this time I do want to go over a slight excerpt from a message that Square Enix themselves posted on the launch day for Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. And coming straight from the creative team responsible for this game of Eidos Montreal, they do go on to state to all our fans, the release of Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy marks the end of the journey for us as developers, but for the game, it's only the beginning of the journey now that you are able to play it. Throughout the last few months, we were able to feel your passion, your hopes, and even your skepticism at times. It all said one thing to me: you were dedicated fans who just want to be carried away in an authentic Guardians of the Galaxy experience. This game feels like a breath of fresh air in the times that we live in. It's fun, it's colorful, it's deeper than one might think, and ultimately speaks volume to who we are as a species. Yes, the Guardians are, for the most part, from outer space. Despite their different origins, their regular disagreements, and their flaws, they're a group that accepts each other's differences. They're able to learn and grow while staying true to who they are. They want to belong, be part of a family that can be dysfunctional at times, but as you will discover through the game, also solid as rock. We can only wish that for all of us, the family that is humankind. We had a lot of fun making this game, and we put our hearts and souls into it. I hope you're going to feel that. And if we do manage to put a smile on your face as you play the game to make you feel something, that'll be our best reward possible. Signed, Jean-Francois Dugas, the Senior Creative Director at Eidos Montreal. And after completing the entire experience that I recently finished playing through, I can 110% say with absolute certainty that the amount of passion that Eidos Montreal have for the Guardians is absolutely out of this world. If you are someone who is highly skeptical towards Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy going into the game, especially considering that this is in fact published by the same company responsible for the highly controversial Marvel's Avengers, I am happy to announce that this game is nothing like Avengers in the slightest. And in fact, this game is a perfect example as to what exactly Marvel's Avengers should have been in the first place. One of the things I do absolutely have to praise Square Enix for with Guardians is exactly how clear the marketing was for this game since day one. Ever since E3 2021, Square Enix, Eidos Montreal, and Marvel Games made it absolutely clear that Guardians was simply going to be a complete 180 from everything that we saw within Marvel's Avengers. And on top of that, the game does have an extremely clear-cut approach, where basically what you see is what you get, because Guardians as it currently stands right now is not planned to include any DLC content of any kind, no microtransactions, and everything that is featured within the game can simply be unlocked by playing through the story and exploring through certain areas. And in my personal opinion, I find this extremely refreshing to see within a AAA superhero game. There's no huss and no fuss, not just because of how Guardians is structured as a game, but also due to the fact that the narrative that is included within this title is honestly one of the most compelling superhero narratives I've ever witnessed in gaming. This has easily become my absolute favorite rendition of the Guardians team to date. And while there might be a few similarities between them and their MCU counterparts, Eidos Montreal still managed to pull off an incredibly unique interpretation of each and every one of these characters, while also making them feel incredibly relatable and unique in their own way. I am totally in love with the hardcore 80s inspiration aesthetic that Eidos applied within this Guardians universe, and specifically tailoring that to the one and only Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, where essentially in this game he is a flat-out hardcore 80s rock and roll space pirate.
We're not pirates, we're legally incorporated heroes for hire.
Gardeners of the Galaxy?
What? No!
It's also a major plus that unlike Avengers, where the entirety of the cast was filled up of well-known actors within the gaming industry like that of Nolan North, Laura Bailey, Troy Baker, and more, Guardians of the Galaxy actually is full of brand new unknown voice actors to completely fill the shoes of these incredibly iconic characters, and doesn't feel like an imitation of what we have seen in the past. And while I am personally a major fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's version of the Guardians of the Galaxy, I found myself absolutely laughing out loud throughout several moments of this game's main campaign, which does last around 16 to 18 hours if you are just playing straight through and not trying to look for any extra collectibles. It has all the narrative humor that you would expect in these several installments featured in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, while also featuring an extremely compelling and heartfelt narrative that did manage to pull on my heartstrings throughout several moments of the campaign, which did feel similar to some of the other emotional moments that you would expect from the previous Marvel games like Insomniac's Spider-Man franchise. And thanks to the longer runtime that is featured within this game, each and every single one of the Guardians does have their time to shine. But a huge shout out to Rocket for making me laugh out loud throughout several times of the game's story.
That's cause you keep calling it gooey stuff. It's nano-resin.
Rocket, wanna try jumping across?
Suicide. Nope. Groot needs to do this. If you ask for a rubber ducky grenade, I'm gonna bite your toes off.
Welcome.
To Novacore headquarters.
Please state your preferred language of communication.
Nuh-uh, not letting you do that, Quill. If you pick Kree, Quill, I'm gonna gnaw your ears off. What the flark is that?
Definitely not a monster.
Now, besides the insanely well-written narrative that is featured within this game, let's move on to the more nitty-gritty elements with, of course, the gameplay. The primary premise of Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is that you are playing as Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, and only Star-Lord throughout the entirety of the Guardians team, which was viewed as slightly controversial amongst some individuals when the game was first revealed during E3 2021. But given the fact that this game is, again, a narrative-focused story-driven experience, I do think it does make the most sense to keep things locked to one particular character as your primary playable hero. Akin to another sci-fi gaming epic of Mass Effect, think of Star-Lord as Shepard and the other Guardians as your squad mates. While even though you aren't able to directly control each character during combat scenarios, you are able to command them in whichever way that you choose. Each member of the team does have their own variety of strengths and weaknesses, which does add a little bit of variety when doing several different encounters. Rocket does his best to focus on area of effect like damage, Drax focuses more on staggering your enemies to weaken their defenses, Gamora is a much more close quarters combat damage dealer, and the one and only Groot does have a lot of crowd control abilities as well as pretty much being your team's healer. But when it comes to Peter Quill himself, that is sadly where the game starts to falter. While it is rather fun to mix and match each Guardian's abilities with one another, Peter sadly doesn't have the massive arsenal that you would think he does. The only main weapons at his disposal are his blasters and some rather stiff up close quarters melee combat. And while each of the Guardian's abilities and Peter's blasters can be upgraded over time, the mechanics surrounding the fighting system do feel a bit clunky at times, which sadly could have used a bit more polish. However, that's not to say that the fighting within the game isn't fun by any means, because it absolutely is. It sadly just could have used a bit more tweaking. Because believe me, being able to summon all the Guardians together within the huddle mechanic where Peter is able to demonstrate his leadership skills and deploy the Guardians out into battle after a small pep talk and blasting single classic 80s hits like Relax or Take On Me or even getting rickrolled is without a doubt one of the best moments I've ever experienced within gaming. And speaking of combat, there's also a few sequences during the game's story where you are able to directly pilot Peter Quill's ship of the Milano and engage yourself in some extremely fun aerial battles. However, just like the combat system itself, the flying mechanics when it does come to the Milano don't feel as smooth as they could be and instead come off as rather clunky and not as fully polished. But regardless, I found myself with a huge grin on my face every time one of these segments happened, because flying into a deadly fleet of spaceships that want to do nothing but kill you while blasting Iron Maiden to full volume during this encounter is nothing but pure awesomeness. But on the flip side, when you're not surrounded by the massively action-packed sequences that this game does feature, you are able to slow things down and take a step back by interacting with each and every one of the Guardians on the Milano and and learn more about their personal backstory if you end up finding collectibles throughout certain missions. The Guardians also talk with one another throughout the entirety of the game almost non-stop, which funny enough didn't find itself to be annoying in any way and simply was just the natural chemistry that each of these characters had with each other. This is also where the choice system comes in, where you are able to decide particular routes to take within the game's story and also select certain optional conversation dialogue to interact with the Guardians even further. Although don't expect this to be like a Telltale game where each and every single one of your choices will quote-unquote matter, but instead it does allow for the conversation and interactions between the Guardians to feel more fleshed out in the long run. It also doesn't hurt that the game as a whole is pretty darn gorgeous to boot. In the end, everybody, while Square Enix may have not handled Marvel's Avengers in the best of ways when it does come to its live service approach, which indeed can work if handled properly, I do think that they have absolutely redeemed themselves when it does come to how exactly they handled Guardians of the Galaxy. In between choosing back and forth from Persona 5 Strikers and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, I am extremely close to possibly declaring Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy as my potential game of the year for 2021. Overall, it's just a really rock-solid AAA Guardians experience that totally does the property justice in more ways than one. And while there might be a few rough patches within the game, like the rather clunky combat mechanics and certain choices within the game's narrative not holding as much weight as you would expect, it still is a huge step in the right direction for Square Enix to take when it does come to their Marvel gaming properties. This game also has an absolutely kick-ass soundtrack, not just relating to its licensed 80s music, but also being super creative of making a completely original rock album, which is directly the inspiration that Peter Quill takes to name himself Star-Lord. The world building and narrative detail that is featured within this game is exactly what makes single-player experiences so special, and everything that Eidos Montreal managed to pull off within this title just makes for one FLARKIN good time, which is why I'm giving Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy a solid 8 out of 10. Now that Marvel's Avengers and Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy have both released, we don't know as it currently stands right now as to whether or not Square Enix and Marvel Games may in fact continue their partnership down the line to make another AAA Marvel gaming property, or if this might be the last installment within their team-up. Either way, I do hope that Square Enix does take into consideration the massive appealing fan response that they have garnered with Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, see what worked with that game, and hopefully do the exact same thing, if not something similar to that, if they end up making another Marvel title down the line. Because if done right, I definitely think that Square Enix and Marvel Games will be able to shoot for the stars.